Breaking news, the Supreme Court of the United States has told Ghislaine Maxwell, convicted child sex predator, convicted child sex trafficker, convicted child sex abuser, we will not take your appeal. For those of us that were eagerly anticipating what SCOTUS was going to do, this is a huge relief for justice. I am sure the victims and survivors of not only Jeffrey Epstein, but also of Ghislaine Maxwell, because remember, folks, she is just as culpable as Jeffrey Epstein. Any type of glossing over or gliding over idea that she just, quote, facilitated, which, by the way, she did. She groomed these young victims. She helped lure them in, but she also herself partook in the abuse itself. Any suggestion that she was just some, bystander or just some random co-conspirator is not founded in the facts or in the law. Just to get you caught back up to speed, if you will recall, Ghislaine Maxwell was indicted by the Southern District of New York. She went to trial after being indicted in 2020. She was convicted. Who was one of the lead prosecutors from the SDNY, the U.S. Attorney's Office? Maureen Comey, the daughter of former FBI Director James Comey, who we know has been unfairly, vindictively, and selectively prosecuted now by the Trump administration's DOJ under the tenure of Pamela Jo Bondi, personal lawyer and law lackey for Donald Trump. Maureen Comey, one of the most skilled and successful prosecutors of these types of crimes, she was summarily fired just 1 week, in fact, less than 1 week, than when Todd Blanche, Deputy Attorney General of the United States, also personal lawyer and law lackey for convicted felon Donald Trump, just less than a week before he went down to Florida, pulled Ghislaine Maxwell out of her federal prison, brought her to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tallahassee, and sat down and over the span of 2 days spent more than 9 hours chatting like two little hens. After that meeting between Blanche and Maxwell, what happened? Maxwell was transferred from that federal prison in Florida to a minimum security camp where she is eligible to be able to do off-site work, off-site, volunteering, whatever the hell you want to call it, but it's definitely not the type of security prison facility she was in Florida. We all see a quid pro quo. We see the back scratching going on. You hook me up, I'll hook you up. And the audio and the transcript that was released from that Blanche Maxwell meeting was not only rife with lies, misinformation, and disinformation, it was clearly an attempt by Ghislaine Maxwell to curry favor with convicted felon Donald Trump. Why? Well, consider the obvious, folks. If the Supreme Court of the United States has not granted an appeal to be heard of Ghislaine Maxwell, then really what's left for Ghislaine? She's serving a more than 20-year federal prison sentence right now. So if you're Maxwell, where are you going to go? Hat in hand. You're going to try to go back to Trump for what? Pardon or clemency. Now remember, Trump has unfettered discretion, as we've seen him do, to be able to grant a pardon. He can also grant clemency in the form of a commutation of a sentence, meaning her conviction stands, but her sentence is gone, whatever's left of her 20-year sentence that she has to serve. The pardon, though, eliminates, erases, completely disintegrates any conviction for her crimes. What do you think? I'd love to know your thoughts in the chat below. Let me know your thoughts as to whether or not you think Donald Trump has the balls to be able to pardon Ghislaine Maxwell, knowing the furor around the Epstein files right now. I don't think Trump touches it. I don't think he does it because he doesn't want to pour kerosene on the conflagration, which is the huge American demand for transparency concerning the Epstein files. But crazier shit has happened at the hands of felon Trump. We've seen him do even more wackadoo shit. And so, you know what? Never say never. But let's get back into the rejection by the Supreme Court. There were some of us that thought, and I still think, that there was a pretty strong legal argument that was asserted by Ghislaine Maxwell concerning Jeffrey Epstein's non-prosecution agreement. So the theory behind Maxwell's appeal to the Supreme Court that was rejected. That's the breaking news. Is Maxwell said that non-prosecution agreement that was entered into in the mid-2000s by and between the Southern District of Florida, its federal prosecutors, and Jeffrey Epstein in order for him to get that sweetheart plea deal that he got with the state of Florida. There was the non-prosecution of co-conspirators clause in that agreement. And Maxwell says, I'm the beneficiary of that no prosecution of co-conspirators clause. Now, Maxwell's name was not clearly identified in any agreement whatsoever, but she argues a few things. One, clearly it was contemplated that it was any co-conspirators, Jeffrey Epstein. And the second argument she made was, any and all U.S. attorneys' offices across the United States should be bound by that Southern District of Florida Epstein non-prosecution agreement because one prosecutor in federal court should be bound by a contract that is binding by another federal prosecutor in another court. She raised that as a defense when she was indicted by the SDNY, and the trial court judge says no. She then re-upped that in her appeal after she went to a jury trial and was convicted by a jury of her peers, and the appeals court said no, thus setting the table for her to ask the Supreme Court of the United States to take up her appeal to answer these questions. Now, what happened was, during summer recess, for the Supreme Court justices, they then, at the conclusion of the summer, did something called the Long Conference, which is a time for the justices to sit down and consider what cases shall we add to our October 2025 docket, meaning what are we going to hear to make decisions about and to rule and make opinions on. And look, as we know, and I've covered here extensively, especially with the help of my brilliant friend, Steve Vladeck, constitutional law professor, the Supreme Court is overwhelmed right now with emergency applications on the shadow docket. The fact that they're even able to get to their regular audit of cases is stunning to me. This was not an emergency application on the shadow docket. Ghislaine Maxwell asked for the Supreme Court to do something called grant cert. Grant certiorari, meaning I have filed this petition. If I am Ghislaine Maxwell, I want you within your discretion, the Supreme Court, to take up my appeal, to which the Supreme Court has said no. Okay, so there's only a handful of cases that after the Long Conference, the Supreme Court justices said they would add to their docket that is going to be heard beginning today. Today is the first day of the October 2025 term. The petition to SCOTUS was filed by Ghislaine Maxwell in April. And again, she argued that her criminal prosecution was barred by that deal between Jeffrey Epstein and who? Well, I'll remind all of you because he just sat for a closed-door deposition with House oversight, although according to Congressman Robert Garcia, that fantastic House oversight leading Dem, who told us here at the Katie Phang News Channel that they're not done questioning Alex Acosta. Alex Acosta was the then U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Florida, and he's the one who authorized and approved that sweetheart plea deal that Epstein got. Acosta, apparently, according to Congressman Garcia, having no qualms, no remorse, no regrets about letting Epstein get into that deal. Telling, is it not? Anyway, Maxwell argued in her petition for writ of certiorari that those negotiations, right, between the federal prosecutors in the Southern District in Florida and Jeffrey Epstein after he pleaded guilty, right, to those state criminal charges, right, that agreement meant that she should not be prosecuted by any federal prosecutor's office across the United States, and that her charges in the Southern District of New York violated that agreement. Now, let's talk about timing, right? Because that's really interesting. She files that petition to the Supreme Court in April. The Department of Justice, led by who? John Sauer, yet another personal lawyer for felon Trump, who argues as Solicitor General, etc., that the Supreme Court should reject Ghislaine Maxwell's pitch to the Supreme Court. And remember, it was all on timing, right? There were deadlines for the briefing that had to be done. So that happens by Sauer. He makes that argument, right? But then afterwards is the Todd Blanche Ghislaine Maxwell meeting. So I kind of feel like, if I can read tea leaves here, The DOJ had originally taken a position that was to oppose what was being sought, but they really had to take the official position because Supreme Court was saying you got to file your briefing deadlines, right? You got to meet those. And they had already asked for an extension and they were not going to get another one, right? And so they had to actually take a position. And at the time, the Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein files kind of chaos wasn't at a fever pitch yet. We do know that, remember, this petition was done in April. We have that release in July of that DOJ memo. And so now you have the DOJ kind of taking the position officially with the FBI that there's nothing there. So doesn't the DOJ in its position to the Supreme Court kind of have to be consistent and say, well, no, you shouldn't take this up because there's really nothing there? And then the reply, which was powerful by Ghislaine Maxwell, said, you can make all these arguments that there's nothing there, but this prosecution agreement or the non-prosecution agreement is going to bind you no matter what. And in the end, obviously, the Supreme Court said no. Ghislaine Maxwell's lawyer, David Oscar Marcus, said in a statement that they're deeply disappointed the Supreme Court declined to hear Ghislaine Maxwell's case, but he claims that the fight isn't over. Serious legal and factual issues remain. We will continue to pursue every avenue available to ensure that justice is done, end quote. Now, look, he's an effective and very good criminal defense lawyer for Ghislaine Maxwell. Clearly, I mean, he got her to be able to sit down with Todd Blanche, right? And look, his pursuit of a pardon or a commutation or some form of clemency from Donald Trump is going to be his priority right now, seeing how the Supreme Court didn't take up a repeal. But justice being done for Ghislaine Maxwell is not justice being done for the victims and survivors of Epstein-Maxwell. Clearly, the Republicans are thrilled with this government shutdown. It allows them to evade being able to not only swear in the newest congresswoman from Arizona, Congresswoman Grijalva, and we know Mike Johnson is just bullshitting the world when he acts like, oh, we need more final official results before we can do that, which has never happened before. But the GOP's thrilled, right? Because if you don't get Grijalva's vote on the discharge petition, you don't have Epstein back front and center, which is why all of the drama with Chicago and Texas and Portland and California and the National Guard and everything that's happening, it's still important to talk about the Epstein files and let's call it this, the Maxwell files, right? They go hand in hand. There's a reason why we continue to uplift and amplify this information. The Supreme Court did the right thing by not taking up this appeal. We will watch carefully to see if Donald Trump has the nerve to give a pardon or clemency in some form to Ghislaine Maxwell. I don't think that he will. Maybe he'll be busy trying to pardon P. Diddy, who just got sentenced to multiple years in federal prison this past Friday. I don't know. But I do think thematically, the Republicans, they want to make this go away. And I don't think that giving a pardon to Ghislaine Maxwell will get this out of the headlines. But be mad, be outraged, demand accountability. That's what we're doing for the victims and survivors of Jeffrey Epstein and the victims and survivors of Ghislaine Maxwell. Katie Phang here. We launched the Katie Phang News Channel in partnership with the Midas Touch Network so we could bring you the latest in legal and political news. Straight, no chaser. So if you're a fellow truth teller, hit that subscribe button and share the word about this channel so we can build a high information America together.